100 music production tips. Now, most of these tips are going to work inside any DAW, but for the purpose of this video, I'll be using Logic Pro. I'm a songwriter and producer myself, so I'm going to be using some of my own song examples to give you context for each tip. If you're curious about what my music sounds like, there's some links in the description below. The first section is going over some popular song arrangement techniques, and to the best of my ability, I've categorized each section in the timestamps below. Number one, think of your song as layers to a cake. Bird's eye perspective, when you look at your song, you should see layers. Just like a good chocolate cake has delicious layers, your song should have delicious layers too. From a bird's eye perspective, if we look at the song, you can see the layers and the differences between the verses, the intros, and the choruses. Just notice like the last chorus here. Verses, the verse, for example, verse 1, less layers. Verse 2, a bit more. Intro is kind of a medium middle ground there. So take a bird's eye perspective and look at your song when it comes to the arrangement of how many layers you have with respect to each section. Don't be fooled always visually, because we're here to listen to our song, so don't always be fooled visually, because you can have that layer and that dynamic behind the scenes, right? It can be in automation, for example. But this is a great tip just to quickly visually look, how am I doing 4 layers when it comes to baking this cake? Number 2 is using reverses as transitionary elements between the arrangement of your song. For example, between a verse and a chorus. I like to use pianos, crashes, or other types of audio that have transients. They just create great swells when you reverse that. For example, these are piano chords. If I reverse that audio by going to the region and just clicking on the reverse checkbox, other DAWs will have similar things. Once I reverse it, it sounds like this. So you can add these swells between different parts of your songs to create those transitionary effects. Number 3 is tom rolls, another great arrangement technique to add as transitionary elements between your parts. Here's a tom roll fill that I've programmed. Very simple. This is just a sample I've gotten from Splice, and then I just imagined how I might play it as a terrible drummer, and I programmed the Midi in. I split it out onto 2 different tracks to get some space. That's probably not realistic to how toms might be panned, but I don't really care because I like the way it sounds. So without the tom rolls, I can just mute them. Rainbows on the west side, so much harder than now with the tom rolls, mind you didn't have much context getting into this, but with the tom rolls, rainbows on the west side, so much harder than just think of it like a live show. That is really going to glue those sections together. Simple little tom roll. Number 4, high cut frequency filters. One thing I do a lot, and one thing you hear a lot in music, is just taking some of the instruments in your arrangement and removing the high frequencies in certain sections of your song. This is what I meant by you can't see everything visually, because this happens behind the scenes in automation. For example, this electric bus here, I have these guitars. You can see this faded blue line behind the scenes. That's the automation of the high frequencies that are being ducked in the verses. So they're kind of bright and open in the introduction and in the chorus parts. But then in verse 1, they're just being softened in the highs. So it kind of pushes them back more in the mix, and it's creating those layers or that dynamic in your instrumentation. And to do that, in Logic, high cut frequencies are really easy to do. You can get the channel EQ up by just pressing this button here. And then you can set where you want the highs to start, or just draw the automation in here with this blue bar. And you can increase it up over time. You can also curve it up over time. Number 5 is using drum overheads. This is a tip I got from my friend Billy. He's out in Los Angeles, and I worked with him to record my most recent record. Thought this tip was really cool. We use the drum overheads as a layer. Instead of using every mic on the drum set, you can use just the overheads, maybe in the verse sections, for example, and you can distort them to really get a lot of crunch by just using any distortion plugin. And using that just on the overheads, it adds a lot of like dimension to your verses because it's giving that room from the drum set. And I think that sounds really cool by kind of having them in the verses and then bringing out all the mics back in for the choruses to make it really sound really punchy. Bit of an exaggerated example, but this is the drums with the overheads. Now without. The overheads bring in that nice room, right? Which can be a great dynamic or arrangement switch in your song. Number 6 is using silence. It is the easiest arrangement tool that you have in your toolbox as a producer because you don't do anything. You just use silence. So for example, on my bass, I just take the entire bass out in verse 1, the first half, and I do the same thing in verse 2. I don't have to think about how do I automate the bass or how do I change it, or I just use the silence of the bass. So you can do that with all sorts of instruments throughout your song. Number 7 is coming from a tip by Jack Antonoff, who is a very popular producer, and I saw him talking about this on YouTube, is sometimes he automates the entire master bus with a delay or maybe a reverb to put the entire song into a different space for a specific section. So you might go to the master bus and add a stereo delay or some reverb, and then automate the mix of that reverb, let's say for the chorus. So something like going here, adding your reverb, and then in Logic, we can automate very quickly by going to touch, and I can just automate the entire chorus. Now, this is going to be pretty dramatic, and it might not work for every song. And you can kind of hear him say the same thing when he's giving this tip, because it is a bit of a thing that you don't really do often. But again, he's kind of a no rules type of producer. Number 8 is, does your song sound interesting when you play it in different parts? Similar to number 1, where we took a bird's eye perspective. When you're working, or when you're more like at the final stages of your production, let's say, take your playhead and then play verse 1. Then move over to verse 2, play it again. Do they sound the exact same? Do they have the same instrumentation? Do that with your chorus. Go to playhead, take your playhead, play it at chorus 1, take your playhead, play it at chorus 2. Does it sound the exact same? If so, you might want to change it. You might want to make them different. And it's just a great kind of personal A/B test that you can quickly do when you're further along in the production by just almost like scrubbing along with the playhead, like you might edit a video, doing the same thing with your music. Number 9 is using the mute button. It's there to use, mute things. You don't always need to add more. Sometimes, most of the time actually, you just need to take away. If you need to make that decision to take away something, you do that by muting. So play your chorus or play your verse and go through some of the instruments and mute them. What does it sound like without them? Is it dramatic and you really need that part in? Then keep it. If you're not really missing it, there's a question there of should you have it, because it is taking up space if it's there in your song. Use the mute button while you're listening to your song when you're nearing kind of the end of your production. This next section is going to be all about recording production tips. Now, I do most of my at-home recording in the box, besides guitars and vocals. So this section is going to be really valuable to the at-home producer who's working with a lot of MIDI, but some audio too. A good rule of thumb is to stay at or under -6 dB when you're recording. This is how I was taught. Some people might say a different number, and I'm sure it's fine as well, but I think this is a rule of thumb that I've lived with, and it's always worked for me. So when I'm recording in console, or if I'm doing something directly into Logic, I just make sure that I'm not going over -6 dB. -6 is that nice common ground that gives you enough headroom that you can still push it up after, but you still have that space. If you, for some reason, did play a little bit more hard, you'd have that space. Number 2 is, if your sounds suck, then it might be you. I'm still getting better myself, or always getting better, right? But for example, if you're trying to play guitar and you're trying to record a part and it just sounds bad, it might be you, because you're not a great guitar player yet. This was me at the beginning. This is why I'm sharing this tip. I spent hours trying to get my guitar recordings really good. I just wasn't a good guitar player yet. But the more I practiced my instrument, the better my sounds got, right? But at the beginning, don't always worry about doing it yourself. I see a lot of at-home producers just trying to do everything, and that's really hard to do. But when it comes to sounds, the most important ingredients that make up your song, sometimes it's helpful to outsource those sounds to session players or use different online marketplaces for people to play the parts who are professionals. Number 12 is less plastic, more realness, aka more you. I love this one because I think the more authentic you can make a production, the better it will be. Like I said, do a lot of in-the-box recording, so I'm always looking for an opportunity to record more that I can bring into it myself. Whether it's as simple as claps or shakers, like that's easy stuff you can do that anyone can do. Get a shaker, get a clap, record your snaps. You can do that stuff yourself. But if you can record your guitar, if you can record the bass, if you can record the drums, if you can record vocals, record harmonies, or bring someone into your studio and record them, the more you can capture moments on a recording, the better your song is going to be and the less plastic it will be. It is genre, it is a taste thing, but I think the more you can record the less plastic your song is going to be. Number 13 is for guitar players, and it's actually just, this one's super simple. It's just use a capo. Sometimes it's easier to play in open chords within your key. So if you're a beginner guitar player, or even if you're not a beginner, open chords just give different textures. So if you, like for example, if you put the capo up really high, you're gonna kind of get that ukulele sound, and that will just give you different textures with the guitar while you're playing in the song. I love to use the acoustic guitar in choruses to open it up by getting fast strumming patterns if the song calls for it, or maybe some nice picking patterns if the song calls for it. But you don't always have to just play your standard open chords or your bar chords. You can play the relative open chords using a capo. So try that out next time. Number 14 for recording is trying things even if they sound bad at first. I really had to get good at this one because that is very counterintuitive. If you are recording something or if you're trying something and it sounds bad, the instinct is to be like, shut it off, move on. Where it is sometimes good to spend a little bit of time like digging a bit on the sound, even if it's bad, because within context of everything else, it might sound good. Here's an example I used in this song. I actually did the capo trick on my electric guitar. So I put the capo up pretty high on my electric and I played the open chords of in the key of this song, but I distorted the crap out of them coming in. And so it gave me a sound like this. The best idea I've ever done, but at least it's a practice of like, hey, this might sound bad, but let's explore it a bit first to see if it sounds good with everything around it. Number 15, screaming or shouting. Two great methods to add some craziness to your song, maybe some space, maybe some weirdness, is literally just screaming into the microphone or shouting, but adding a ton of reverb and effects on it so it sounds cool. You might just not want to have like a scream that's so noticeable, but check it out. This is what I did in this song. This is actually just me screaming. Just take the effects off for you so you can just laugh at me for a second. Yeah! Wouldn't want to have that in the song just as it is, but I'm adding reverb, I'm filtering it a little bit, and I'm adding this LFO tool. Giving a cool little tremolo effect happening in the background. I'm really tucking that in the background, but it's just separating. It's another layer to the final chorus, and it's just me screaming into the microphone. Number 16 would be adding the octave or harmony to any lead line to bring out more in that lead line. So for example, in my guitar part here, kind of a rhythmic electric guitar part, I've added the harmony here, the harmony here and the octave here. So just adding the harmony just brings out so much more. And then in the verse, I add the octave. I also did that in the solos. Here I have a guitar solo, but it's actually 3 guitars. I've just done the main octave here, and then I believe the higher octave here. Number 17 is changing the velocity hits on any part of your drums to make them sound more human. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I do a lot of in-the-box drum recordings. So I'm playing with Midi a lot, and one way to make your Midi more human, especially when it comes to the drums, is just changing the velocity a little bit so every hit isn't exactly the same. Let's take a look at this kick here in the verse and look at this Midi. Now in Logic, you can just look at the velocity here and kind of a graph, and you can see that they're all kind of these marks. They're all a bit different. Some of them are very close to being the same, but you can, if they are all the same, for example, if they all look like this, or they're all flat-lined, that's when you might want to say like, let's lower a bit, and then let's increase some, just so you have a little bit of a human. If you're a human and you're playing the snare, you're never playing the snare exactly 100% the same every time. You don't want them to be too really soft and really loud, but just kind of like this throughout that. If you do that to your kick, if you do that to your hi-hats, if you do that to your snare, to your toms, everything is just going to be a little bit more human. Number 18 is to delay your hi-hats or snares just a little bit so it grooves more. There's a sense of urgency a little bit. I learned this tip from a producer in Germany. His name is Alex Sprava. He produced my 3rd EP, and we produced that in Germany. He told me about this tip. There's a few ways you can delay things. You can actually move the things back in the session view by like clicking and dragging stuff. You can also move it by ticks, by right-clicking and moving. See, or sorry, not ticks, nudge values, setting nudge values to ticks. So if you move it by a tick, it's like, I don't even know what the music measurement is, but it's super small. So if I move that to tick, and then I do the shortcut option right, I've actually moved it there, but it's just way too small. See, I've moved it this much. That's a tick right there. So if I do another tick, option right, it's moving over. So this is very, very minimal, hardly noticeable. If you keep going, you'll start to notice it. So if you're gonna do something like this, moving hi-hats, moving claps, it would be good to play your drums and then slowly delay your hi-hats with the shortcut option right, or nudging the hi-hats to the right, and then see how that works with your groove. There is another way in Logic to do it. In the region inspector, I believe you could do it somewhere here. Yeah, delay. So you can delay the region here as well using note values. So that could be more helpful to you if you understand what these are. Number 19 is to spice up your Midi. If you're using a lot of Midi and you find yourself copying and pasting stuff a lot, that's going to just make your song more plastic. So one way to get around that is to use the tip just a couple tips ago, where you're changing the velocity of some of the notes, but also you're changing the chord structure a little bit. You're not necessarily having every chord be the same. So if we take a progression like this, and most of the velocities are the same, lots of the chord structures are the same, what I would do to make this a bit more interesting would be to make every chord a little bit different. Now, take this one with a grain of salt, because you might have, like I find I often have piano parts in the chorus where they're just doing simple chords. You don't need to get so tasteful with the chord shapes. If it's just maybe carrying some weight or carrying a bit of dimension, this is really helpful if you have a main part going through the entirety of your song. So there are just definitely moments in the song or in the verses where you really can hear this. This tip is beneficial for those types of tracks, not necessarily just simple chords that are only doing specific things at certain moments of your song. A couple things you can focus on if you don't know what you're doing. You can add inversions. So you can take the top notes of the chord and bump them down an octave. You can add notes, you can take away notes, you can change timing, you can change velocity. All of that, if you do that throughout the entirety of your Midi chord progression, it's going to sound a bit more authentic. Number 20, your low end is great and it's going to add all the oomph and warmth to your song, but don't overload it. The kick and bass in your song will be the majority of your low end. You don't want to cloud or fill up the low end too much, because that's just going to cause too much muddiness. For a lack of a better term, it's just going to cause too much muddiness in your song. So when it comes to the low end, really pick a great kick sound or get a great drummer who knows what they're doing. Get a great bass sound, making sure those work together. And then as you work in the mids and you start getting in the high mids and the highs, you can start having more instruments in there. Number 21 is to tune your kick and have it in the same key as your bass. When I learned this, it just opened doors. It just helped me open doors to be like, hey, you can tune drums to help them work with your bass differently. Let this just open doors for you, because when you see this chart, for example, and this chart is notes on the left, and then we have frequency ranges on the right. So this says if we are in the key of C, if our song is in C, the kick, or the 33, 65, 131, 262, these are all like fundamental frequency fundamentals. At 33, that's a C. At 65, that's a C. Basically, if you're in C major, make sure your kick fundamental in whatever key you're in matches the frequency ranges in this kick chart frequency. It's not necessarily just for kicks, it's just frequencies to notes. So you can look up on Google frequencies and notes chart. Number 22 is layering two different kicks. So if you're on the hunt for a kick and you find a great one that has great low end, but it doesn't have any top end, and you really like one kick with top end, you can just use both the kicks and layer them together. You can layer them together in a sampler in Logic Pro or any sampler that you have in your DAW, or you can just have them on two separate tracks. Like let's say this kick here, I like the low end, nice beefiness, and this kick here, I like the high end. A bit of crisp there. I just kind of have them on two separate tracks, then I EQ them the way I want. So let's say on this kick, I don't want any bottom end. So I just take that away. I just remove it all. Let's say a slope at 500. And then this kick, let's say a slope around 500 too, to get that bottom end, to take away the top end. And now I have both of them. And I might need more top end for this one. Or you can find the right overlap of EQ to make both those kicks work. Number 23 is don't be afraid to have your recordings be loose or messy. There is a breaking point there where you actually want quality recordings, but what I mean by this is don't always aspire to have your recordings, every single track, so polished and clean and amazing, because this is what I thought at the beginning, and I spent a lot of time doing that. No noise and perfect timing, 100% on the grid. And then the sum of those parts is almost just too good, too perfect. There's no like magic. And when I actually started listening to some of these demo projects that come for free in Logic and looking at some different stems online of professional songs, all their individual tracks, you kind of see how loose and messy it is. This Montero mix, which is a Lil Nas X song that was available in Logic, it's no longer available, but you could see kind of the messiness in like the banjo recordings, or the messiness in the drums, the claps. Listen to this banjo stack here.
Now let's talk about idea generation and some different production tools you can use to spark new ideas.
Capture recording, great tool, only available in Logic. I'm not sure if other DAWs have this one. So this is kind of DAW specific, this one. Basically, let's say I whip up a piano and I'm kind of jamming along, trying to find some ideas to song, and I find an idea, press record, I jam the idea in, not your greatest hit idea here. I stop recording, then I'm like, oh, I just want to record one more part. I just keep playing the track, play my piano, like recording a lead line over it or something. then I'm like, oh no, I didn't record that. No worries. This little button up here is just going to actually play, or not play, it's going to populate what I just recorded. So it's right here. Really cool because you kind of have this in the back end. Logic is always kind of listening to you if this is on. If you want this thing on, in Logic, go to Customize Control Bar and Display. You can put Capture Recording on here. It's this little button. Number 25 is the Step Sequencer Pentatonic Scale. So this is inside the step sequencer of any software instrument. Let's say I'm jamming on a synth track. I go to my step sequencer in the editor, step sequencer tab, and then I just, this little kind of icon here, I go over to templates, major or minor. So let's say we're in C major again. I can do major pentatonic. So now these notes here are all in C major pentatonic, which means they're all going to sound good within your song. So you could just kind of create a lead line by literally knowing nothing about music production or music theory, sorry. This is a terrible example, but you just kind of click boxes and you're going to create a cool little lead line by just experimenting with what that sounds like. And all of these are in C major. So they're all going to sound good. You can't really mess that up. Cool feature you can use on synths, bass, any software instrument. Number 26 is using the Midi effects chord trigger. So over on the left-hand inspector window, we have Midi effects. The chord trigger, just a little kind of added plugin that you add to your inspector. And when you play one note on your Midi controller, it generates a chord. And we can do this on the piano too. So you have Midi effects, chord trigger, filtered by more like keyboard voicings, like pop right. Bit more standard. But the idea here is you don't really need to know how to play chords because they're available here. But better that you've actually learned how to play chords. You're going to have more power to you if you actually learn the theory. Number 27 is using the Midi Effects Arpeggiator plugin, specifically on bass. I love this one. Use it a lot to get rhythmic ideas. So if you have a bass track and you have whole notes, so a little progression like this. If we add the arpeggiator to it, it's going to give an insane amount of rhythm. And then we can choose the pattern that might work for us. So right away, maybe an eighth note pattern. It's very much like someone's with you on stage plucking the bass. And you can also like draw your own pattern in here and then create the velocity. These velocities are quite sensitive and you can actually get something kind of cool. The other way to do it is you just use the different patterns that are available at the bottom. Sometimes these sound a bit weird, but you can come across some things that are good starting points. Number 29, we're dipping it a little bit into automation now. This tip is really quick. It's a little setting that you should have on. Most DAWs, I think, have this quick automation. In Logic, if you're in automation, you can actually go to Mix and auto-select automation parameter in read mode. What this is going to do is when you want to automate something, and then you have the plugin or anything available for you to click. So for example, let's say I want to automate the tape delay of this grand piano. Well, if I want to automate the wetness, I click the wetness of the plugin, and that inputs the wet parameter in my automation, so I can immediately program the automation in. That is a great setting to have. If you don't have that and you click this, this input doesn't change. It is always default set to volume. So then that means you have to go in and search for the parameter yourself. It doesn't take that much time to do, but it's just about improving your workflow. Number 30 is an EQ automation. We talked about filters and ducking frequencies in verses to create a cool arrangement that like makes an instrument seem further away and then pops up over time. Furthermore, on this tip, you can do all sorts of things with EQ. It's not necessarily just removing the highs. You can remove the lows. You can remove the lows and highs at the same time. Use EQ as like a paintbrush tool in your instruments to carve and boost too. Boost frequencies. Most of the time EQ is talked about like ducking and cutting and lowering frequencies, but EQ in some places is a great way to bring out, like boost frequencies here or there to kind of paint the sound of your track. And I tie this to automation because if you can do this in automation, so if we have automation, we have an automation parameter in read mode, so we can just kind of click these filters and they're in here for us to automate. So I like to sometimes automate the high cut, where essentially like there's no lows at the beginning of something, but then they come in over time. Something like this. And then on top of that, you can automate the highs. So let's say actually at the beginning, there's not many highs, but then over time they come in like this. So two types of EQ automation happening. We could do even a little bit of a boost, you know, in the 500s, let's say. Production is all about just being creative with your ideas. 31, reverb automation. One thing I use all the time, especially on vocals. I will be automating most of the time the mix or like the wetness of the reverb and sometimes the decay of the reverb too. So if this was a vocal, automation parameter in read mode, so I'd have my verb either on the insert or maybe it's on an aux track, and then I'd click mix, it's already here, it's input in my automation, and then I can just draw in the mix. So it's one is 100% wet. So I might, coming into a verse or coming into a chorus where I want a nice tail of reverb, I could lift up that reverb. Or I could maybe, it doesn't even have to be a lift. I could have something completely dry in the verses, but, you know, wet at the beginning. So this could be something like this. Wet comes up over time and then really, really dry in this part. And then you just shape the sound that creates the cool, interesting in and out dynamic effect in your songs. Number 32 is delay and feedback automation. Similar to reverb automation, but this is just automating the delay, specifically the feedback in the delay, because that can create a huge volcano and add a lot of tension going into a different part of your song. So I'll give you an example. This is one, you can see these shapes here that's actually reverb and a delay. You can see I have an Echo Boy, which is a delay plugin feedback automation, and then a wet crystalline reverb. Listen to what this does when you automate the delay and the reverb over time. Kind of creating those sweeps and those swells that if you really push that in the mix, it can create a lot of tension. So how I'm doing this is basically I have the delay plugin on the insert of the track, and then I click, just like we learned in this tip before, an automation parameter, that setting, auto select automation parameter in read mode. Just click the feedback, it shows up here, and then draw it in. So essentially, like over time, it's going like this, right? It's automating the feedback. When in doubt, add the plugin, click the thing so it shows up in the automation, and then draw it in with your pencil tool on your cursor inside the session. Number 33 is using touch and latch automation for speed. So up till now, the automation tips that I've been showing you, I've gone into the automation view to show you how to do it. But, and this is kind of counterintuitive a little bit, I'm stepping on my toes because I've told you to draw the automation in. Once you get really comfortable with this type of stuff, you don't even have to go into the automation view. You essentially just use touch or latch in the inspector window. So you go here to read. You switch to touch or latch. Those are different. I'm not going to get into them. They're not, you're not going to go wrong choosing one or the other right now. Choose one. This essentially arms the track for automation so that when you're listening back to the track, I could have my plugin open and I could actually click with my mouse and do the automation in real time while I'm listening to the track. This gives it a sense of a bit of less mechanical because you're not just drawing a straight line. You're kind of trying to find that perfect sweet spot. It can be hard with a mouse, which is why you could even do it on your controller if you have knobs. If you're comfortable with the mouse, you can do that in real time. And then you go back and you turn it to read. But when you're in touch and you're in latch, that means whatever you click, whatever you move while the track is being played is being programmed in. So that's really, really quick. You can imagine just being like wanting to automate something. Great, go over here, touch, play the track, automate the thing of whatever. Be sure to go back to read, and then you keep producing. That automation is now hard-coded in. You can always go back into the automation view and correct the automation here. Now that you know how to arrange, record, and spark ideas, let's go over some helpful tips while you're working with samples. Bookmarks in your file browser for third-party plugins. So use this icon over here in Logic. Every DAW, by the way, is going to have this, some type of file browse inside your DAW. So just go and make a folder for your third-party samples somewhere accessible inside the browser. So for me, I have it under sounds, and I just go to my sounds and I have all my stuff here. For you, it's not very well organized, but I know what's happening. So for you, organize your third parties that way so you don't have to be fussing with different windows. You can even if you have a Splice, you can get Splice on here too. For example, all my Splice sounds are all right here in all the packs, where I can actually just go and get the sound from here, you know, and just drag it in. This works for me. I like to be organized with my samples, and this is one way that I would recommend going about it. Number 35 is stretching samples really quickly. Very easy to do in Logic. The quick way to do it on a sample, if I just have dragged this sample in, I'm holding Option to get this squiggly bracket, and then I'm kind of timing it to the nearest grid, seeing if that works as I play it back. That's actually stretching the entire audio signal. There are other ways you can do it inside the editor with the time stretch or time and pitch machine. I believe it's under time stretching algorithm. So there's different ways, different algorithms to use in Logic. The more you stretch, the more you're going to ruin or mess up, let's say, the audio file. But if it's just a few BPM, it's gonna be okay. It's like if it's 10 BPM, then you're gonna really probably either chop it up or just find a new sound. Number 36 is transposing samples really quickly. So if I have the sample here, this sample's in G minor, you can see, and I want to bring it transpose one down, I hold Option and just do down arrow. You can see this -1 is popped. You can keep going Option down arrow to bring it down. You can also do Shift Option down to bring it down in octaves and bring it back up. You can also pitch it up too. Now, just like stretching audio, the more you transpose it, the more you're gonna mess with the quality of the sound. So you have to take that with consideration with whatever song you're working on. Number 37 is triggering samples from your Midi keyboard. Great way to get creative and spark ideas. So let's say I drag a sample in, I've got it transposed now. In Logic, you add it to the sampler track. Quick way to do this is actually just clicking the sample, dragging it over to the left here, and putting it in the quick sampler original or the quick sampler optimized. I'm just gonna do original. I'm gonna show you what that looks like here. What's just happened behind the scenes is Logic has now like sliced all the audio transients onto my Midi keyboard. So if I just press the F3, which is this note here, it's just playing that one note of the sample. Barely audible right now. I can also go over to one shot. I can go over to classic. Classic is gonna play the sample full on. And I can even highlight the specific parts that I want it to play. Let's say I only want it to play. And maybe I create a rhythm with that. Or in Slice too, let's say I actually like what Logic's done, but I can delete some of these. Where, you know, I don't love what Logic's done here, so I might just delete them, delete a bit. When you have your slices, let's say, programmed to the right parts that you want to have it sound, you can either record this, because this is a software instrument now, you can record yourself with your MIDI keyboard, or because it's a software instrument, you can just create a MIDI region here, and you can actually just draw in the MIDI notes. It's a software instrument, right? So you just draw in pattern that you like using MIDI, and this is going to actually be triggering the sample that you've loaded in. Number 38 is sampling your own voice. Something I love to do in most of my productions. You never really can hear my voice, but it's always in the background. I mean, of course you can hear my lead vocal, but I have a lot of things happening in the background. So you either record it with your mic. Oftentimes though, like your phone is fine for these type of recordings. I'm talking about background ad libs or background kind of texture things. So if you just record your voice, ya da 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 da, something probably better than that, and then I'm just going to send that over to my computer. I'm going to drag it in. Here it is. Ya da 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 da. Same thing as before. Drag it in, but let's do optimize this time. I'm going to find the right parts that I want to play. Add some verb. So you can get some weird things and get ideas going. It's all about just sparking creativity and moving towards what you think sounds cool. Number 39 is actually using a third-party tool. So sorry if you don't have this one, because you're going to need it. I guess you could use another tool, something similar. I'm going to be using Splice. This is about finding the key of your song, going to Splice and finding vocal samples within that key to use as like ear candy textural starting points for your song. This is a cool little tip I've from my friend Billy out in LA, and we produced my most recent record together. So this song is in G sharp minor, and I kind of wanted something in the verse here just to have a little bit of, itty ditty ear candy, something just to kind of stick out. Basically, I'm pulling up Splice, I search vocal, then I do filters by key, G sharp. Sorry, it was a little G sharp minor, also known as A flat, and then female. I just like the texture of a female in this voice, or in this specific section. And then while I'm playing my song, I'll play through the samples. And then if I think one might fit, they're not going to fit perfectly right, but you're going to get kind of sounds first. You kind of want to match if the sounds work. Download it and drag it in. So eventually I'll have like 3 or 4 samples loaded up where I'll try to kind of cut, stretch, and just make it work. So for like, this is exactly what happened in this song, this little sample here. That was a vocal thing that I got from Splice, but with the, guitars and the vibe of the song, sounds cool, right? It's like this interesting bit just comes out of nowhere. And there's tons of vocal samples in Splice, for example, that you can use for stuff like this. The next section is my favorite part about being a music producer, and it's about leveraging your own creativity to create authentic textures and sounds in your productions. Number 40 is using drum triggering in Logic Pro. So sometimes you might have a drum pattern you really like, but you don't like the sounds of it or the samples that are being used, and you have your own samples that you want to replace. There are plugins that do this. For example, one is called Trigger, but you can actually do this for free in Logic, and most DAWs will have some type of doubling or replacing. For example, if I have this super simple drum vibe here, I like the pattern, but I don't like the samples. What I have to do is bounce these tracks down to audio. Now, when these are in audio, I can click on the track and go Control D, and this is going to bring up the drum replacement or doubling. And I want to not double it, but I want to fully replace it with a kick. I can either choose kicks that are available in Logic from the left-hand side here, or I just go and drag my own sample, a kick sample, into this sampler. So this would be our triggered kick, or triggered sample, let's say. So I drag the triggered sample into this track, and then this is my original kick. That's the pattern that's being triggered. So you can do that with snare, you can do that with the hi-hat too. This is really beneficial because using Logic drummer tracks to get a bit of that human feel on the snare, on the kick, or on the hats, it's still not human, but it has a bit more human vibe to it. And then triggering your own fat samples onto that gives a cool vibe. Number 41 is using vinyl noise or crackle in your song to get a bit of that lo-fi, maybe not pushing it as much as the lo-fi hip-hop beats. They really push that vinyl crackle, but enough where it's getting some texture in your room or in the recordings. I have a couple vinyl crackle recordings. Here's an example of one. It's just dust. It's just vinyl crackle. You can get these off libraries. You can actually just, like, if you have an old vinyl player, use your iPhone, record a bit of the crackle, or just record your own sounds and just start building up your database of sounds. A bit of noise, a bit of crackle can add some life or just some realness to a track. If you don't want to do this, you can get plugins like the RC20. It's just inside the plugin has a way to add crackle. Number 42 is distortion. You can push it more than you think. When I just was beginning production, I didn't really add a lot of distortion at all. I didn't add it on my vocals, didn't really add it on anything. And the more I learned about harmonics and texture, distortion was almost a plugin I used like a lot. And then I worked with the producers that pushed the distortion so much on things where in solo, it's like, that sounds bad. But again, coming back to the fundamentals of already what we talked about in this video is in the sum of everything, things just work. I love using the Devil-Lock Audio Level Destroyer distortion plugin by Soundtoys. It's everywhere on YouTube. You see a lot of producers using it. It just has great sounds. And I love the mix knob here. So I kind of like push the crunchiness or whatever you want. The darkness kind of filters it a little bit, and then mixing it in to taste with the rest of your track. What I've learned and what this tip is you can push it more than you think, but always getting fresh perspective, fresh ears on it. Number 43, still on distortion, but distortion specifically for vocals. This is something I never did when I first started. I thought distortion was only for something like for guitars. Now I use it all the time on vocals because it just sounds so great. Again, I use the Soundtoys distortion, either the Devil-Lock or the Decapitator distortion, but I'll usually do it on an aux track and then mix that aux track in, or I will use the Soundtoys effect rack on the insert. Just a little bit of distortion. You don't have to push it as much as you might on other instruments just because your vocal is so up front, but try using distortion on your vocal as an insert or on an aux track, and then just breaking up the vocal a little bit just so it pushes out front of your mix. I think you'll be really surprised with this one. Number 44 is using analog outboard pedals. Because I'm a guitar player, I have a lot of guitar pedals here. Actually, I don't have too many, but I have some ones that I like to use a lot when I'm playing guitar, but I'm also just recently got into using the guitar pedals for other audio in my song, whether that's, well, anything, vocals, other guitars, pianos, synths. I'll route the audio into the guitar pedal and then back into Logic. So something I never just thought of doing until I was working in the studios and I saw another engineer do it. You kind of like mental model your guitar pedals only for playing guitar when it's totally reasonable to use them on other things, especially and most specifically my reverb pedal. It's the Big Sky reverb pedal, very popular pedal, great sounding reverbs, which is why I like to use it on different elements in my songs. Number 45 is using analog EQs for color. You'll find cool sounds if you push things. When I first started, I was always like, it felt like I was just being so clean and not really breaking the rules enough. Where now I'm just like, I'm here to break rules. And I want to find new sounds that haven't been done before. And part of that is just going pretty wild with things, driving the hell out of it, but then bringing the volume back in context, maybe on a guitar or maybe on a vocal. So I wouldn't be afraid to go in there and push some things in context to the song you're working on and making sure it fits. Number 46, still within the ballpark of EQ, not so much analog EQs, but just your typical channel EQ. Take the highs away from a piano, take the lows away from a piano, boost the highs of your harmonies, using that as a tool instead of just like always adding more and more instruments. I come at it to approach where like less is more, and then use your chip tools and your compression and your reverb and your volume to like find those spaces in your productions. Number 47 is using the noise gate plugin on hi-hats or other instruments where you kind of want a bit of rhythm. Cool hack tip, whatever you want to call it, that I got from my friend Yoshka in Berlin. He did this on one of the songs we worked on. I thought that was just really insightful. Adding a noise gate plugin on hats, for example, or any other track while playing with a threshold is going to give not so much a tremolo effect, but it's going to break up the signal because you're closing the gate and opening it at wherever threshold you want. So it can kind of like give a bit more rhythm to a song, or to a sound, sorry. Try it out on things where you're like, there's something there. Maybe I should look for a new sound. Or maybe you just need the little noise gate feature hack. Number 48 is breakbeat chops. If I have this breakbeat here, let's say I like the samples and the sounds in that breakbeat, but I don't like the pattern. You can chop it up by clicking and dragging it again to the sampler. If I just do the quick sampler original, I'm going to have all the kicks, the snares, the hats, whatever is in that breakbeat on my controller now. It's kind of like a snare hit. That's a kick. I can either play pattern on my MIDI controller, but again, I don't necessarily have to do that. I can go in and draw a pattern in. So there's a kick. Just draw your kick pattern in. So it's a 4 on the floor kick. Or something more interesting. And then you just gotta kind of go and look for the other elements in that breakbeat and then make your own pattern. Number 49 is using the Tremolo tool. This is a free tool that's going to come in your DAW most likely. In Logic, it's under modulation. Tremolo will give an added interesting rhythm to your song, and you can set the rate here. So if you set a quarter rate, I'll just have it off now for this guitar. Just have a listen to this guitar. Now with a quarter rate tremolo, bouncing in the stereo field, right? You can also have like not bounce as much if you don't want to, and you can also smooth it out, make it go faster, an eighth note. Another trick here is if you go high depth and you go something really fast, maybe 30-second. It doesn't sound good on its own, but sometimes this can add a lot of rhythm in a chorus. It can take an instrument that's dull to something exciting. Similar on movement, number 50 is sidechain. You can sidechain anything to add rhythm. A popular use for sidechain is like sidechaining your bass to the kick drum. So your bass ducks a little bit when the kick comes in, so there's more room for the kick. I'm not going to talk about that. What I'm going to talk about is actually just creating a sidechain rhythmic pattern that you can add to a bass, or you could add to this guitar, for example. I'll do it on the bass because it's really easy to hear. I could totally do it on the guitar as well. Essentially, you can add a track, call it sidechain, and add some MIDI data in here. Right now, I just have a 4 on the floor pattern. But it could be anything. It could be an eighth note pattern, quarter notes. It could be something rhythmic. It could be something that has swing. The idea is whatever MIDI you're going to draw is going to add that rhythm to whatever instrument you sidechain. So for example, if I go to this bass now and add a compressor and go over here and sidechain it to my instrument sidechain, it has to be instrument in this folder because it's a Midi instrument. And then I just set the threshold. I do it fast attack and a fast release so you can really hear it now. Now listen without, just take a listen to this bass without anything. Now listen to it with my sidechain rhythm. So that's that 4 on the floor pattern that's happening. It's kind of giving that pumping effect, which is really a popular effect to do in kind of dance music. But it doesn't have to be a 4 on the floor. It can be any rhythmic pattern. And by the way, this sidechain track doesn't have to be, you don't have to hear it. I can put this to no output and still get a similar effect. Still getting that MIDI information because it's sidechained to this track. See if I turn out the compressor, there's nothing. Compressor on, even though the sidechain track has no output. Great way to add some cool rhythm to a track that might need some. Number 51 is using an LFO tool. This is the only paid plugin that I will mention in this video. And I mention it because it's fairly reasonably priced. It's about 50 bucks. And sometimes there's deals. But also I use it a lot. I see a lot of other producers using it a lot, and it makes things really easy. So like kind of the tremolo effect, the sidechain effect that I just mentioned in the tips before, does something similar, but gives you more options and allows you to do it faster. This tool is called LFO tool by XF Records. And just turning it on will give it a bit of that kind of sidechain rhythm we were just talking about. 4 on the floor, and you can see it's set here at a quarter note right here. Set the rate, set the swing. There's also presets, a ton of presets here that just have different rhythms from different people. Sidechain rhythm, miscellaneous, all these other rhythm, bass, neurofunk 1. I'll show you the example on this guitar here. So nothing. Of rhythm. Add something, right? Number 52 is the speed up and slow down fade features that happen in Logic. A great Logic tip here. You not sure about this one in other DAWs. You go to a track and if you do the shortcut Shift Control and add a fade out or even a fade in, we'll do it on both, and I'll show you both. If you right click and do slow down, I'm just right clicking there and clicking slow down. Watch what happens as it comes out of the track. And coming in opposite, if I right click, do speed up, watch what that happens. Watch what happens now when this track comes in. Really cool effect, very easy to do, and sometimes it might just call for it in your song. Number 53 is Formant shifting your voice. A really cool effect either to do on the lead vocal or maybe sometimes with BVs to give a bit of different texture. Here I have my own lead vocal example here with no effects.
And I don't even doubt you living without me.
So if I add the free vocal formant shifter in Logic, most DAWs will have this. If I just change the formant to -2, watch what that sounds like.
And I don't even doubt you living.
Watch -12 or -10.
And I don't even doubt you.
So what's happening here is the plugin is changing the texture of the vocal, and it's not changing the key. So if you want to change the key, you would change the pitch, which is great if you will add on doubles or on BVs or sometimes on the lead, or having a lead vocal with the same vocal track below it. If I just doubled this track, doubled the exact audio, don't need to re-record it because once you formant shift it, that's changing the texture. So I could have one of them just doing my lead like this.
And I don't even doubt.
And then have one formant shifted track below it like this.
And I don't even doubt you living without.
That really can give a really cool effect if the song calls for it. Tip number 54 is a one-note strings tip. I have a track down here. It's just called strings. And all it's doing is this. And it's just doing the tonic, the root note of my song, and it's happening only in the choruses. And it's not loud, I'm varying it like really, really low, but it's just poking out on the high end, just offering a bit of sparkle. Sometimes your songs are gonna call for that little top end sparkle, and this is an easy way to get that. Number 55 is shaping transients. And I think the easiest way to explain this is just to show you what it's like on a drum bus. The transient shaper plugin in Logic is under Dynamics Enveloper. And you can just see here, you can actually look at the curve. If I increase the gain of the attack, you can see that's kind of increasing the gain of that, well, the attack, the transient, and you can lower that to have it a bit more smooth. You can also play with the gains of the release as well and the total output, and also setting the threshold too. But just take a listen to what it's like as I increase the gain, watch the attack and the punchiness of the drums, and then as I lower it down. Your DAW will have a transient shaper like this, but there's also some great paid plugins out there too. Number 56 is sound selection. So when it comes to creating sounds and authentic sounds, I think it's really important not just to rely too much on presets, but use presets as a starting point and then edit them from there. So if I was to add some type of software instrument and use the popular Arturia Lab Analog Lab 5 series, it has a boatload of synths. They're modeled after lots of analog synths. That's a great library and great presets to get you started. So if I want, plucked keys, I can just search for plucked keys. And I have tons of options here. Now, these are all great options. They sound great, but it's really rare that it works 100% with your song. Use the super easy dials at the bottom that they give you, or actually open up the synth and do your own editing to find that more authentic sound for your song. It's too easy just to click and go. There's going to be times where you might win the lottery and it works, and that's just what you need. But oftentimes, to build your skill set, to build your taste, spend the time working with these dials to really narrow in on a sound that's authentic for your song. The next section is a mix of tactical and theoretical, and it's all about putting your production hat on. These are all valuable lessons that I've learned from other professionals in my career so far. Number 57 is building a foundation to your production. So this is when you're starting a production from scratch. Ideally, you have the song finished, right? You can come at it from two different ways. Either you're producing a song as you're writing it, or you're producing a song with the finished song already, like the finished songwriting part of the song. So my song Back in Full, which is a single that I recently released, was a song that I kind of produced while writing it. So at the end of the session, you had this kind of idea of a song, but then you had to start producing it from there. The tip here is just to build the foundation. Don't just start with the lead vocal. Don't just start with the more fun things that you might want to do first. Build the house. So ideally start with the drums or the bass, the rhythmic parts to your song that are going to carry, the driving force of your song. Don't start with the lead vocal. Wait for the lead vocal until there's enough energy in the song where you can get a good performance. If there's no drums, start with whatever the driving force is to your song. Number 58 is don't follow the rules. Better yet, break them. I try to remember this one myself because you can often get caught up in production is so rules oriented. Like there are rules to compress something. There are rules to add reverb on something. There are rules to do this. When we often forget, me too, especially, that we're making music and the tools we have inside of our DAW are there to be broken so we can find authentic sounds. Like I often turn on my guitar and put just a mic in front of it, whatever. I don't even care what mic it is. It's a 58 or SN7B, or if it's this Neumann mic, or heck, it can be the YouTube mic. I don't care often when I'm just creating and trying to find sounds, because different things that you're not really overthinking things like mic choice and room and perfectness. You always get different results. And these were things that I've just learned in the studio with other professionals, especially when it comes to like compression. This is one that I often get where I've worked with a lot of like engineer focused producers, and then I've worked with a lot of creative producers. Now the engineer focused producers are always like very specific about how they compress and the ratios, and then you work with some creative producers and they're just like smashing the shit out of a guitar, and like they're not even sure what they're doing or why they're doing it. And I much prefer the latter because it just gives you more of a feeling like you're a kid in a play box. Number 59 is, when do you know if it's too much? For example, when do you know that if the production is done? For my song Smoke Signs, where I produce with Billy out in LA, I asked the same thing because I was worried that we might be just adding too much. And his response to that was just like, let's push it. Let's listen back tomorrow and then we'll see if we did or not. And we did exactly that. And we realized, yeah, we might have pushed it too much with some instrument, a few layers that we didn't need. So if you're experiencing that too, where you don't know the answer is of how much is too much, just push your limit a bit more and then take a fresh ear's perspective on it to get your answer. Number 60 is, don't get personally too attached to your production. I'm terrible at this one, which is kind of why I want to preach it too, because I need to learn it more. I always get demoitis, where I work on a song for a few days, a week, whatever, and I love what I've done at the demo. And then as soon as I go and collab on the song with someone else and they change it or they want to add things, I'm like, no, but it's not like the demo. I always get caught up in that because I fall in love with the demo. And I've learned to kind of separate myself from the demo. When I produce a song, I don't listen to it too much. This helps me because when I do reproduce it or collab with someone else on it, I'm just not as hurt because I didn't get too attached to the demo. Number 61 is to find your rhythm of production, meaning, can you produce a song every day? Or are you the type of person that can produce for 2 weeks straight, but then you need 2 weeks of a break because you're out of creative juice? For me, I'm more of the latter, where I like to work really intensely, and then I like to take a break. When I'm working high intensity, I'm trying to produce a lot and I'm trying to push my skill set so I can learn faster. And then I get trained and I take a break. The more you produce songs, you're going to find your rhythm as well. Number 62 is practicing the 30-minute productions. I use this thing called like a time timer. It just gives you a nice visual. And in that time, I try to produce a song, but I'm only focused on the 20% of the track that's going to have the biggest impact. So those are your driving forces. I started doing this exercise because when I opened a track and when I started producing, I found myself just getting too deep into the weeds, where I'm like inside this drummer track and I'm like opened on the hi-hat and I have an EQ up on the hi-hat and I'm like doing surgical EQ on a hi-hat. And when you're beginning, focus on that 20% that's going to have a massive impact on the entire song instead of getting too much in the weeds. Number 63 is, don't mix your track. Just like getting into the weeds too much, you can also get into the weeds too high level too, even though it's not weeds, it's like high level weeds, where you're focusing on like the full polish of the mix, where that comes later when you're producing, especially when you're learning how to produce. You're not wanting to confuse that skill set with mixing too much at the beginning. You're going to have to quickly move faders, and you might want to compress something quickly. You might want to add some reverb, or you might want to EQ something quickly here and there. But the polish, the extra like final 10%, where you're like the perspective, the artistic opinion of the mix, that's not for later. That shouldn't happen until later, because you want to focus on building up the soundscape. Number 64 is think less is more. I'm talking a little bit over myself, a bit hypocritical here with some of these tips, but they are all context dependent. What I mean in the context for this one is like, let's take vocals, for example. Like my early vocal chains or any track, my drums, my guitars, I would have like 10, 15 plugins. And honestly, I don't even know what a lot of it was doing. Now I'm like, okay, what plugins do I need at all, if any? You're going to likely have a bit of EQ. You're probably going to have a bit of compression. You might have reverb. You might not. But Other than that, I'm not looking to add much unless it's a specific textural thing where I want to have like a formant shift or like a pitch thing going on. But other than that, I'm not overloading with plugins. I'm just thinking like the sound first and then like plugins if necessary. Number 65 is focusing on quantity first and then quality. When I first started, I just did a ton of quantity. I tried to produce like 4 or 5 songs a week. So if you find yourself where you're just at the beginning, just do a lot of work. Like that Ira Glass video where you have a great taste, but you still suck, that you just need to do a lot of work. And then once you get better, you can focus more on quality. Number 66 is about equipment. You don't need expensive equipment, especially at the beginning. You should focus more on your skill set, how you select sounds, how you record instruments, how you produce a song, and less on like, I need the thing or the plugin or that new YouTube video that they're like, you need this thing. Equipment will make you better. Equipment will make you sound better, but you don't need it at the beginning, especially if you can't even hear what the equipment does. If you buy an outboard compressor or you buy a new microphone, but you can't hear the difference between a 67 and an SM7B, why are you buying that microphone? Focus on your skill set first, then reward yourself with equipment. Number 67 is release your music to the public. Make sure you release it publicly. This is going to keep you accountable to release music and have an audience for it. If you just have it on your hard drive and you produce a lot of songs, even if you finish those songs, there's just a gap there where if you have an audience, there's a bit more pressure, there's a bit more accountability and honesty in it because you need to like get it out to the audience. And you don't have to listen to what they say or even if they like it. The practice of getting your music out publicly. I did this at the beginning. Every week, 3 or 4 songs that I made a week, I released one of those songs to the public on Spotify. And I still do that today. I make sure that I'm accountable to releasing music publicly because that's one of the only ways to make sure you're consistent with keeping up with your productions.
Making your songs sound more three-dimensional is one of the biggest challenges you might face when you're just starting to learn music production. It definitely was for me. So following these next tips, it's going to allow you to find more space, width, and depth in your songs.
Number 68 is panning. This one is super basic. You already know panning, but like you sometimes forget to use it. Hey, I'm saying you, but I sometimes forget to use panning. Like panning is creating width. You're moving things to like the left speaker or the right speaker. You're creating that width. So use it more. Jack Antonoff, I'm not sure how to say his name, but he's more of that creative type producer too, where he's breaking rules with panning. Sometimes he'll like pan his bass or he'll pan some things that's not supposed to be panned. Like maybe your kick drum or your bass or your vocal, those usually are in the centers, right? Just pan whatever you want to pan if it works for the song. In general, panning is such a fundamental basic that is going to give you width. Number 69 is adding depth and space. You can add some pads to your song and like just playing the tonic root note, like the note or the chord even. In my most recent single, Back in Full, we used, out in LA, we used the Juno 6. It's Billy's synth, and he was playing just the tonic and kind of moving through the triad of the root chord here. Just this background pad.
I can't describe the feeling or put into words why I've been.
Number 70, to add a lot of space, just add a lot of reverb. So for example, on this song, I did like guitar whole notes playing the chord progression, but I took away 100% of the dry signal and I only left 100% of the wet reverb. You can either do that by using it on an aux track. I used this is the Big Sky reverb pedal that I was telling you before about in this video. So it kind of just sounds like this. Sounds super far away, right? That's because we're only hearing the reverb and none of the dry guitar. Number 71 is ad libs for interesting flavor. Usually I like to keep those for the final chorus. Find more space for that ad lib. Don't have it dry and up front unless you want to, but I like to
take a lot of the high end off, put a reverb on it, and tuck it back, and it's just a bit of ear candy in the background. This is an example.
Dance within dark.
So it's just kind of tucked back there. There's not a lot of high end, so it's not really distracting at all, and it's just sitting in there nicely with the rest of the chorus. Number 72 is adding doubles for width. So take your lead vocal, take whatever section in the song you want, record again your lead vocal, pan that one to the left, record again your lead vocal, pan that one to the right, and you'll get something like this, which is super wide.
There's a part of me that always wants to dance with the dark.
Number 73 is adding harmonies, just like doubles, but this one takes a little bit more skill, I guess, if you don't know how to record harmonies. You can also use harmony plugins too if the harmonies don't come to you right away. Great way to add width though, because you could add a ton. You could add octaves, and everyone can do octaves. You don't really need to think about that. Just do the higher or lower octave. But then if you can do the harmonies, add the third, add the fifth, add the lower third, add the lower fifth. With this massive stack of harmonies, we have this.
There's a part of me that always wants to dance with the dark.
Just a little bit more texture. You can hear they're auto-tuned more too. That fits nicely with this production. Number 74, if you're gonna do BVs, harmonies, doubles, making sure that all those are super tight in the session, because if not, and they're coming in different timings or they're ending differently, it just sounds, to me, it doesn't sound good. That's one thing I'm super nitpicky. For example, they're all starting more or less almost 100% in time. So that means that one's not coming in before the other. It means one's not ending. And it's just things are sounding tight. It's almost like one vocal that just has a lot of different texture to it. So you're likely not going to sing them so tight like that. Maybe you're great and you will, but you can do some post-editing and just shifting around, cutting a little bit, make sure they're locked in. Number 75 is finding some space in your lead vocal with reverb. If you want to have reverb on a lead vocal, which most of the time you likely will, you can play with the pre-delay on your reverb if it's right on the insert, and also if it's on an aux track as well. You can play with when that reverb comes in. That's what the pre-delay is. If you increase the pre-delay, the reverb will actually be delayed. You can think of it like that. If you push the pre-delay a bit, the vocalist will still sound up close because the reverb isn't happening right away, so the vocal is still getting a bit of that dryness, which is a cool effect sometimes. So if you want your vocal to sound like the singer is still close to you, but with reverb on it, you can push the pre-delay a bit. You'll notice if you do it like that, it's gonna really be distracting, I think. You don't always have to have pre-delay, but if you push it a little bit, you can actually find that separation with the reverb, making it sound like the singer is still close to you, but that they're in a space. Number 76 is just using a Widener plugin to make your track sound wider. There's going to be some free ones likely in your DAW, in Logic. There's some free ones in modulation. You can play with the chorus, microphaser. One paid one that I'll just mention quickly is this micro shift. Makes any sound super wide.
And I don't even doubt
So cool.
you. Living without me.
Center,
Loving without
wide.
me.
So that's like probably the easiest way to make things wide. Just add a Widener plugin. Number 77 is using two types of reverb on a lead vocal to give a sense of closeness, but a sense of depth as well. So in this example of a lead, we've added both on an aux track. We've added a short reverb, 0.69 seconds. You can add the pre-delay like we were just discussing in a few tips earlier, and then add a long reverb. This one is about 3-ish seconds in a concert hall, so a bigger space. Even going further a little bit more on both of these aux tracks, you can EQ those down on the track to kind of clean up the tails of those reverbs if you want, or that kind of the low end muddiness of those reverbs. So just with this smooth play, it's giving a nice of just room sense, closeness.
I don't even doubt you.
And then with the long reverb,
And I don't even doubt you. Living without.
there's a lot of nice space and depth behind that too. Number 78 is adding a delay plugin on an aux track, but then after the delay plugin, adding a reverb plugin. So if take the same vocal here and we add a delay aux, what I'm going to do here is add any type of delay. It can be your gold standard Echo Boy and then adding the reverb after it. So what that's going to do is going to put that delay in a reverb. So first set the delay of whatever you want. Let's do an eighth note.
Don't even doubt, I don't even doubt you living without.
The delay is really loud, but it's also really close. Turn the reverb on. Maybe do a huge space, longer reverb, 3.6 second decay in a concert hall. We can also EQ that if we want, but I'm also just going to lower the volume on that return track to mix that delay in.
And I don't even doubt you living without me, loving without me.
Now that delay is just not as close, and it's giving a nice, even more lush space behind it. Number 79, sticking on reverb, is you don't always actually need reverb. Dry can make it sound really wide because it's super close in the speakers, right? There's no reverb at all. It's not being pushed back. Use dryness as a tool to like make things pop to the speakers too. I've been getting more into this with the genre of music that I produce and I like. It's a cool sound, dryness, and it can really work if your sound selection is good. Number 80 is experiment with mid-side EQ. I know I talked about not mixing your track. This is a tool though that you can use sometimes in your production that can help create space in the middle or on the sides of your stereo field with stereo instruments. So if you have a stereo instrument, for example, a piano, let's say this was a stereo piano, I can cut the mids by going to processing and going to mid only. I could also do, this is default stereo. I can cut the lefts, I can cut the rights, I can cut the sides. But in this example, I'm saying cut the mids because my vocal is clogging up with my vocal. So I might want to cut the mids because my vocal is going up the middle.
As music producers, it's really important that we fully understand what we're creating, which is why we need to know what we're hearing. So here are some tips below just to help you understand if you're moving in the right direction and you're actually hearing what you're making.
Number 81 is treating your room or using sound reference plugins. So this one was a huge game changer for me because I never did anything like this. I first started producing in a bedroom, no treatment, whatever. This room is fairly treated to what I could do. I thought I kind of had it all organized until I had a friend over and was like, yeah, you got to get this looked at. So what I'm doing now is I'm using a Sound ID reference plugin. This one's called Sound ID reference. I'm not promoting this plugin because there's a lot of other options that you can get. It's called, it's by SonarWorks Sound ID Reference. They all do essentially the same thing. Is basically I went around my room with a microphone and it worked with my speakers to create some type of magic that tells the speakers, hey, sound is bouncing like this and creating these things in your room. For example, my room ducks sounds below 100 hertz. This is before my room, before the purple. And then the calibration is there basically just mirroring that opposite. So if I didn't know that, I would be producing, and this happens before that, you'd be producing a bass, you'd be producing a vocal, you'd be producing your drums, and it's man, the low end is crazy right now. But it's not crazy, it's your room that's crazy. You need to know what you're hearing, so it's a good idea to, at least if you're working in a bedroom or something, maybe get a sound reference plugin, try to do as much as you can to treat your room, just so you know you're heading in the right direction when you're creating sounds. Number 82 is A/B testing ref tracks on your master bus, so you know if you're heading in the right direction with regards to kind of soundscapes. An easy way to do this inside any DAW is to create a mix bus, so route all your tracks. For example, if I only had 5 tracks in this session, I could route all these to a different output and call this output mix bus. So you can solo your mix bus, but you can also have something on your master track being your ref track, and then you can A/B back and forth between those. There are plugins that help you do this, and they're great to invest in. One of them is by Plugin Alliance. It's called Adapter Metric A/B. Essentially, it's doing what I tell you to do, but you just load the songs into this plugin, and you can just toggle back and forth with A/B. Really, really easy, but still possible to do this kind of workflow by creating a mix bus. So you can A/B test your song. Number 83 is working with a master bus, working with some compression, working with a limiter, maybe some EQ, maybe some saturation. Turning that on and off here or there, mainly it gives excitement. It makes your mix sound better because you're making it louder and you're compressing it a bit. And we need a sense of juice, a sense of a dopamine rush sometimes when we're producing to give more glue and punch. That's partly why I do it. And you can see here I have an EQ, I have a compressor, a limiter, and just some beatering plugins. This is not good because it's going to slow your computer down, especially if you're running a limiter. But having them on there and turning on the compressor, turning on the limiter, just so I can see how my mix is translating with that glue on it, I find that really helpful to see where I'm going, but also I think it just makes it sound better. Number 84 is listening to your production, your demo in multiple rooms and multiple devices. I like to listen to it out of the iPhone speaker and my AirPods. I like to listen to it in the car too. An easy way that I do this is like I'll bounce out my full song and I'll route it to a Google Drive called the demos, and here where all my demos are. So that bounces directly to this folder, which is on the cloud. So I can go right away to my car and just put the phone up and have that demo right there. I can connect it. It's already connected to my living room speakers, my phone. I can go and play it from the living room speakers. Just having that easy workflow so you don't have to text it, you don't have to email it. It's just way easier to just go right away and listen to it in another room. Number 85 is recreating what you hear in your favorite songs. Is going to help you become a really, really strong producer, or at least help you have a baseline of ideas and know how to start patterns. For example, drums. Like, pick your favorite songs, go find the MP3s on the internet, drag them into Logic, and recreate the drum patterns of your favorite songs. What are they doing? Sometimes it's hard to distinguish things within the mix, especially when you're beginning, but like drums, those are really easy to hear. You can hear kick drums and you can hear snare drums and you can hear hi-hats and toms and crashes and rides and stuff. So you can recreate them. That's what I did at first. Just help me open my world to drums. As a program drummer, I'm not a drummer, but I know how to program drums and I know the main patterns of drums now, that I can do that really easily just because I dragged and dropped songs and I recreated the drums, programming the Midi in.
One of the keys to becoming a great producer is the ability to work fast. And one of the ways to do this is just to have a productive workflow.
So number 86 for productivity is copying channel strip settings. If I'm working on a Vox lead, I have some plugins here. Let's just say I'm working with these plugins and these buses. Easiest way to copy the channel strip is to be Option Command C, going to the track you want to paste it and doing Option Command V. And that's going to paste the entire channel strip, the plugins, and the sends. Now, if you don't want to copy channel strips, another way to do that is just to duplicate this track. So Command D, and then you have the duplicate track with all the, it's a duplicate. So you have it right below. Now, the thing here is if you find yourself like duplicating a lot of tracks, then your plugins become a bit redundant because they're the same on each track. So you can just create an aux track and send all those tracks to that aux track, otherwise known as a summing stack. Number 87 is turning audio files into MIDI files. So if you have a voice memo or something you want to get MIDI data from, so for example, this vocal track here.
And I don't even doubt, I don't.
Da, 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 da. If you want that melody in MIDI, you can go in Logic and turn, this might be a Logic only thing, and turn flex pitch on, and then go to functions or edit, create MIDI track from flex pitch data, and it's going to give you this data here. Number 88 is saving instrument patches. So if you use an instrument a lot, save it as a patch so you can recall it later. I use a lot of software instruments, so I have saved a few patches that I use a lot, one of them being a bass sound. If I open up the library here and go to user patches, I can see I have my retro 60s bass that I use a lot. So that's just a trillion bass that's ready to go. I've even added some compression EQ on it with a bit of a room down here, so I can record this bass. Easy, right? I didn't have to go search for the instrument, add the thing, add the other thing. It's saved as a patch. If you want to save your own patch, add your software instrument So let's say you've done a lot of work and you have an instrument, use the Arturia Mini. This is what it looks like. You can even find your ideal sound, start with presets. Let's say you have a great sub bass sound that you want to use in future projects. Then go to user patches here, save it, call it what you want. My sub bass, save it, and then you can recall that in this project, but also every other future Logic project. Number 89 is skip cycle. If you're working on a part of your song where you're not really sure that it's needed, for example, you want to split a 8-bar verse into 4 bars. Well, what you could do is you could, if this is your verse here and you have 8 bars, and you're not sure if you really want bar 11 to 15 yet, cycle it and go right click, skip cycle. And what this is going to do is when your playhead reaches bar 11, it's going to skip right to the pre-chorus at bar 15. So instead of you having to like highlight everything, delete it, audition it to see if you like it, keep it there and just cycle it and let the playhead skip over so everything's still locked in time. So watch as I play, just watch the playhead as I play to bar 11 here. Watch it skip right to bar 15. Number 90 is bouncing tracks in place for mental commitment. This is something I learned from a guy named Alex. We worked on my third EP together. He lives in Germany. We worked in his studio. We worked in Pro Tools, and there's one thing you can do in Pro Tools. It's bouncing tracks down to audio. It's also known as commit. That's the task in Pro Tools, which is the bounce down task in Logic. This is essentially like you're working with a software instrument or you're working with audio with lots of plugins and you bounce that down just to straight audio or mental commitment. It's not the purpose of like saving computer speed, although indirectly that has a nice effect. It's for mental commitment of like, I'm going to go with the sound I've worked on and I'm going to move on. It's hard to do because you always want to be like, I got to edit. I want to edit this thing, or I might need that. I might need to change the style in like an hour from now. Of course, don't bounce down things unless you've put the time into it, but it's a great way to just commit to something and move on. Number 91, use markers for structure. I always have these markers built in templates that are ready for me to go. This is when you hold Option and click the marker. So if I click just chorus, the playhead's just going to go there, right? But if I click Option and click chorus, the playhead's going to go to the beginning of the chorus. So if I'm like, oh, I know I want to hear the third chorus, I just have to click there. I want to hear the verse, click there, second verse, first chorus, and I'm just holding Option and clicking the marker, the playhead, it goes directly to the beginning of that section. Number 92 is using the BPM metering tool to help you find the BPM of any reference track. So as you're working with reference tracks and you loaded them in, just go to metering BPM counter, load this guy up, have it on while the track is playing, and Logic will tell you the BPM of that song. You can also Google it. You can also try to guess it or count it, but this is going to give you the exact BPM, and it's really, really helpful. Number 93, also on BPM, is something called tap tempo, which is something I don't use much, but it's there for you as an option. When you open up a session and you want to produce a song and you want the tempo to be something like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. You can do that by tapping on your computer keyboard so Logic can guess the tempo for you. It's under key commands. If you edit the assignments and search tap tempo, you can see tap tempo is a command that you can set a key to. So you can go 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4 on that key, and Logic will say that's in 105, and then you can edit from there to get the BPM for your song. Number 94 is project alternatives. I use alternatives a lot when I'm in production because I might go down different paths for the song. So I might do a different chorus, for example, or a different bridge or no bridge. And I might want to create a new alternative so I can A/B test these against each other, but always have that previously saved version. So in Logic, I go to File, Project Alternatives, and you can see I can have a new chorus or a new alternative, and I can say bridge or new bridge. It doesn't matter. These are just new files that are saved in the same space that you can always revert to. Number 95 is production templates. You've seen my markers at the top here. It's not impressive, but I'm just saying having things inside a Logic session that you do often that are always ready to go from the beginning. So If you don't have templates, consider starting an empty Logic session and adding everything in that session that you do often. So for example, maybe you'll have markers, maybe you'll have a bunch of tracks loaded up with popular instruments that you use, drums, bass, guitars, synths, audio tracks, have your vocal chain on there, have different plugins that you use, have some aux tracks ready. It's just finding all these little things that will help you make music faster, especially if you're beginning and you're at that quantity headspace where you want to produce a lot. This is going to help you save time. So when you have all those things loaded up, just go File and Save as Template. And then you can reopen that every time you start a new project. Number 96 is Time Machine and backups. Making sure that you have some type of automatic backup happening if you're likely on Apple because you have Logic. So get Time Machine going. I have it going once a week automatically. I don't have to think about it. You can have the option to do it every day too, if you want. I also have all the finished projects. So like all the bounces that I do, I have those stored in the cloud that's automatically backed up. Don't wait until it's too late. I know it's like, yeah, I'll do backups when I can. And then it happens where someone steals your computer, you drop it, it breaks, whatever, and you lose everything. Number 97 is to extend the backups that are created for you within Logic. So yes, Logic does autosaves for you, which is great because sometimes it might just crash and you haven't saved. Don't worry, there's an auto-saved version for you. And it creates these other backups that you can revert to. So if you go to File and you go to Revert to, these are backups that are saved for you. And then you can list like 100 backups here if you want to. You can go to Settings, General, and then go to Auto Backup. You can choose how many alternate versions you want in your backups. Number 98 is adding a limiter, a stock limiter to your master output. Got this tip from another producer out in LA. And basically this is supposed to save your speakers. I've never had problems with my speakers. Sometimes though, things have blown out of my speakers and it's just crazy loud. So this, if you don't set any gain, but you just set the output level to be negative 0.1 or 0, it's just going to chop that signal off. So you're not going to have any problems with crazy loud things coming out of your speakers. Number 99 is importing old Logic Pro files. So in the top right, we have kind of a Mac Finder window. You can think of it like, but this dog-eared icon, this paper with the dog-eared, these are all old Logic Pro files. You can go into any one of them. Let's say Flame in the Cold. Look, it's popped up of versions for me. On alternative versions. So let's say I want the first Flame in the Cold, and then I get into the files and I can bring in any of this information into my current session. Why this might be helpful is often I use this if I'm like, oh, I really liked the bass sound I did last week or last month in X song, or I really like the way I treated the vocal in the song I did last year. And I can go into the Logic file and take that whole chain, the audio too, and bring that into my current session here. Really, really valuable. Tip number 100 is to learn all the shortcuts so you can just be way more efficient with your DAW. So for all the Logic Pro users out there, you can watch this video right here. It's 100 Logic Pro tips, or this video right here. It's 100 Logic Pro tips part 2. Over 200 tips to help you be way more efficient in Logic Pro.